This is a 1995 Mitsubishi Montero, and it's a very cool old school SUV, but it's not the cool SUV. It's not the Land Cruiser or the Defender or a Jeep or the ones people love so much. The Montero is more under the radar, more subtle, but it's still a very capable and durable SUV. Today, I'm going to review this old school Montero and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, big news, this Montero is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This has four-wheel drive, V6, it's almost completely unmodified, and it's spent its whole life in warm climates, and it's now on Cars and Bids with no reserve. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Montero, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. Alright, time for the quirks and features of the old school 95 Montero, starting with a little overview of, well, the Montero. So this first came out back in 1981. That was the first generation Montero, different from this second generation model. And Mitsubishi probably debuted this vehicle as a response to the growing popularity of four-wheel drive vehicles in Japan, like the Nissan Patrol, the Toyota Land Cruiser. This came out around the same time as the Isuzu Trooper. These vehicles were starting to become, well, a thing, and so the Montero was part of it. Now, the original Montero was sold all over the world, and I mean everywhere. In Asia, it was called the Mitsubishi Pajero. In parts of Europe, it was sold as the Mitsubishi Shogun. In Korea, a Hyundai version was sold called the Hyundai Galloper, and even here in the United States, there was a Dodge rebadged Mitsubishi Montero called the Dodge Raider, and we got the Montero here too. It was ubiquitous globally. Now, the second generation Montero, this one, came out for the 1992 model year here in North America. It was completely redesigned compared to the even boxier original version, and it was offered with a choice of two different V6 engines. The vast majority of Montero models, including this one, had a 3-liter V6 that made about 170 horsepower, or you could upgrade to a 3.5-liter V6 that made about 215 horsepower. It wasn't a huge jump, but it was expensive, so most people didn't do it, especially since you did get a standard V6 even in the regular version. Now, all over the world, the Montero or Pajero or Shogun or whatever, depending on the market, was offered as a 4-door or a 2-door SUV, but here in North America, it was only sold in the 4-door configuration. Mitsubishi realized what a lot of other automakers would throughout the 1990s, that 2-door SUVs simply aren't popular, except for the Jeep Wrangler. Otherwise, 4-door or bust. And so that's the only way we got the second gen Montero in the States. Now, here's a crazy fact for you. This vehicle is still in production in China. When Mitsubishi ended its own production, they sold the rights and the tooling to a Chinese company who still makes it to this day. And I'm not talking about the Montero in general. I mean, this body style that came out more than 30 years ago is still in production in China. As for the Montero in general, it was redesigned. The third generation model came out in 2001, and that was sold in the States through 2006, and then Mitsubishi pulled the plug. But it was redesigned again globally and still sold in a lot of other markets, including Mexico, and they're pretty common in the Middle East. And that last generation Montero, Pajero, Shogun, whatever, was sold all the way through 2021. So it was a popular vehicle globally for a long time. But this, the mid-90s, was kind of the heyday of the Montero in the United States. As for the quirks and features on the outside, probably the biggest and most notable quirk is just how different this looks from modern SUVs. When you're buying a new SUV these days, it means you're getting a crossover, which has been intentionally styled and designed to resemble a car, with relatively clean, flowy, stylish lines and a relatively low overall height despite an elevated driving position. This isn't a crossover by modern standards. It's an old school body on frame, robust, tough, truck-like SUV, and it looks it. Look at these flat slab sides that basically go up at a 90-degree angle. It's narrow, it's tall, it looks like the old school SUV that it is. And in addition to just the design, there are other giveaways of its age and its, well, truckiness, like the fact that it has steel wheels. No alloys here. You got steel wheels with a lot of lug nuts for serious, capable, robust driving. In back, you have a full-size spare tire mounted on the rear, not hidden under the car where it's hard to get to because you might need to get to it often when you're out on the trails. And you have a very prominent tow hitch mounted right in the center of the bumper. This thing looked like it was tough because, well, it was. And there are some other interesting quirks and features besides the robust look on the outside of this Montero. For example, the rain gutter that goes all the way around the top of the car, basically the entire way around. This is for rain. It would collect just like a gutter on a house and then deposit it in certain areas so it didn't just slide down the car. These days, cars have integrated rain channels into the body panel so you don't see them, but the old school functional vehicles just had this. Here's another interesting quirk you probably wouldn't notice unless you've spent a lot of time staring at one of these. This little triangle here. There's a hidden triangle on the tailgate, which is placed here to make sure it opens properly with the hinge. The triangle actually stays put when the tailgate opens, but you wouldn't necessarily even notice that there's a separated piece unless you notice. They did a good job hiding it, disguising it in the color of the lower two-tone exterior paint. And one other interesting thing is the placement of the reverse lights, which are just stuck onto the rear bumper. Although it actually makes sense when you look back here because the spare tire took up a ton of space by itself. The license plate also took up a lot of space. And then at the edges you have the brake lights and the turn signals. Where does that leave the reverse lights? I guess the answer is the bumper. It certainly doesn't look nice, but that's where they put them because this was all about function and capability, not style like a modern crossover. And next we move inside the Montero, where the interior is also very functional and very basic. It's not ugly or bad, but it's straight up square functional. It's intended to be used and not admired or looked at or appreciated for its beauty. You can especially see this in the center control stack, which just has your buttons, your switches, everything arranged in a very basic, simple manner. And the center console may be even more obviously just functional with levers, buttons, switches, all sort of arranged in here, but none in a particularly beautiful or even well-planned manner. It's all just intended to be used. That's especially clear when you look at the gear lever, which isn't some push-button electronic thing like in a modern car. Instead, it just sticks way up out of the center. There's a button on the side, and you shift it into gear. That's how it looked in the 90s. It certainly isn't beautiful. But even more, well, functional and basic is the lever to switch into four-wheel drive, which you can see next to that. You're in two-wheel drive high right now, but you can shift this up into four high or four high with the differential locker or four low with the differential locker. So several different four-wheel drive options to choose from, but they're all presented in this rather ungainly lever in the center. But that's how SUVs were back in the 90s. These levers were all pretty common. They all had them. And it's nice to see that this particular four-wheel drive SUV has that differential locker, which improves its capability off-road. Now, despite the relatively old school basic nature of this interior, there are some rather cool quirks and features in here, starting with these gauges above the center control stack. You get your battery voltage, your oil pressure, pretty standard, but on the left you have a screen that shows a compass heading direction and a thermometer next to your temperature. It also shows a little image. I guess that's supposed to be the Montero, and it's a cute little cartoon image of the car. Now, also in this vicinity, the gauge cluster you can see is finished in this very 1980s, kind of early 90s orange with this very 80s, early 90s font that certainly looks, well, of the period. And in another example of just how different this is from a modern crossover, in the very center of the gauge cluster, the middle of everything, is a display, a diagram showing which drive wheels are currently in use. This isn't something you're thinking about when you're driving your RAV4, but in your off-roader Montero, you wanted to know what you were shifted into. And you can see right now, only one wheel is illuminated, so we are in one-wheel drive. No, that's not actually true. We're in rear-wheel drive, but the light has burned out. But this diagram let you know exactly what was on at any given time. I mean, you would just never see it in a modern crossover, except maybe buried deep in some gauge cluster screen menu. The other interesting quirk in this interior, something I actually kind of adore about this vehicle, is the basic simplicity of everything. You just had these big rectangular buttons, the hazard lights, the window defroster, everything was simple. Buttons, switches, it was all just incredibly easy. And you had a grab handle over on the passenger side for your off-roading adventures. The passenger would grab on and you would go, and that was just a simple, basic, well, safety feature, frankly. I also like the placement of the ashtray and the cigarette lighter in this car. They're in the center console. You can see the cigarette lighter right here in the middle, which makes you think, oh, they wanted to make it easily reachable by both driver and passenger. But the ashtray is hinged specifically towards the driver. The passenger is not intended to smoke in the Montero. No, that privilege was reserved for the driver. Interestingly, one surprisingly modern touch this car does have is this little switch here in the center console next to the cigarette lighter, the AT mode switch. This is actually an early sport mode. You can press it up and turn on power mode, and I think what it would do is just tighten your shifts. Your automatic transmission shifts be a little quicker to make the car accelerate a little faster. If you press the switch the other way, it would go into a mode that's shown on the gauge cluster as hold, which probably would hold gears, I guess, if you were going downhill to do some engine braking, but that little switch was responsible for, well, an early sport mode if you wanted it. And another nice luxury in the Montero, a surprising one, up above, you have a sunroof. This Montero, maybe this entire trim level, didn't come with a sunroof, but this one was added later in the aftermarket. Now, that sounds pretty crazy, cutting into the roof of a car, but it was actually somewhat common in the 90s and even into the 2000s. Cars that didn't have sunroofs or didn't offer them, they were only on higher trim levels. A lot of people added aftermarket sunroofs. It was a pretty common business. And this one works just fine. It opens right up, it closes right up. Someone wanted this Montero in this spec without having to pay for the high-end trim level with the sunroof, so they got this and then just added their own. And next up, we move on to the back seat of this old school Montero, where you discover, much like the exterior, much like the front seats, basically nothing. It was functional. This was a seat. You were supposed to get in and sit down, and there's not really much to it. You did have power windows, which I guess was nice, and you did have a center armrest, although it is the most laughable, pathetic center armrest I've ever seen. It's like the width of a credit card. That is basically the entire size of this center armrest. There's really nothing back here, or so I thought. But then I started poking around a little and I discovered this little like cushioned carpeted panel next to the seat. There's a latch on the top of it, and you pull the latch, pull this panel down, and discover a cup holder and an extra armrest. You have one of these on both sides of the rear bench seat. You put it down and you are really living in the lap of Montero luxury, sitting in the back seat with your power window and your cup holder and your extra armrest. And next we move on to the cargo area, where we have, well, an interesting surprise, specifically third row seating, which wouldn't be a surprise today. Basically every SUV, especially a larger one, has it, but back in the day, it wasn't really all that desired or all that necessary, and it was mainly the purview of full-size SUVs like the Chevy Tahoe or Suburban. But the Montero has it, and as you can see, the third row is folded up against the windows, which certainly looks strange, especially by modern standards, where third rows just fold flat into the cargo area. So why did they do this? Well, the Montero has a lot of off-road hardware underneath, and so there's not room under the car for the seats to simply fold flat. So the options were either have removable seats, which nobody wants because they're bulky and heavy and hard to install, or have seats that folded down and you didn't have a flat cargo area, which is annoying. The other option is this: they fold into the windows. Now, it blocks your visibility, but the benefit is a full-size flat cargo area when the seats aren't in place, and it works pretty well. Now, this third row, is especially interesting because it has a couple of neat quirks. For example, you're folding up the seats and you want to find a place to put the headrests. You don't want to just toss it inside the car where it's going to get lost. There are little holes right here on the side of the seat. This is storage for the headrest when the seat is folded, as you can see. Put the headrest there and then you'll always have it. And then when you fold the seat back down so it becomes a seat again, you know exactly where your headrest is and you can just install it in the correct headrest place. Another interesting cargo area quirk in the Montero is a flashlight, a built-in flashlight that's installed right here on the side of the cargo area. It's powered by a car charger style outlet, which, surprise, surprise, is also mounted right here in the cargo area. So you had an extra little flashlight. Long before Rivian made it cool, the Mitsubishi Montero had a built-in car flashlight. And there's still more. The rear tailgate door is actually a door. And by that I mean it has a handle that you could use to pull it closed. It has an interior door latch you can use to open it from the inside. And it even has a door lock, which you never see in tailgates today. It was intended to be used as a fifth door where you could actually climb out of the vehicle from the inside without any assistance opening the door from the outside. And you might be wondering about the two little panels on the inside of this tailgate. Well, this little circular one, open it up and that's where you add in your washer fluid for the rear wiper and washer. The other one, the larger rectangle, open that up and you discover a full toolkit integrated into your tailgate, which is of course a great feature to have if you're going somewhere off-roading way away from anything and you have some sort of problem. You can fix it with your built-in toolkit. It's a pretty nice feature in your Montero cargo area. And next up, another cool touch in the third row, you have sliding windows. They open like this. Half the window slides open like what you might see in a house or an RV. And the benefit is obvious. It gives the third row passengers real airflow coming through the windows. Unlike those vent windows that a lot of cars had that only opened a couple inches, here's a real big sliding window. Another cool quirk of the third row. All right, driving the 95 Mitsubishi Montero, and my first thought is this feels like a body-on-frame 90s SUV. And if you've ever driven a body-on-frame 90s SUV, a Trooper, a Rodeo, a Honda Passport, all those, Land Cruiser, obviously 4Runner, they all have a pretty similar feel to them, which is sturdy, upright, boxy, good driving position, fairly narrow. A lot of these SUVs were narrow at the time. A wide interior wasn't a big priority, and in fact it was a drawback, especially in Japan. And so a lot of these SUVs where that was the primary market, that was kind of the thing they went for. And so a lot of these things kind of felt narrow. And some of them had reputations for rolling over, like the Isuzu Trooper as a result. But you also have just sort of a basic, simple interior that was a hallmark of these vehicles. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but not like amazing. There wasn't like ultra high quality parts or design or whatever. It was robust, robust, robust. And that's what it felt like driving it. You always had, all of these things had a V6, whether it was the Rodeo, the Trooper, the Patrol, the Pathfinder, they all had like a V6 with 170 horsepower, something like that, 190 horsepower, somewhere in that range, and kind of a harsh ride because they were body on frame. They were intended to be like trucks, basically. So they felt strong. They felt not fast, not powerful, but reliable, durable. They all had this same feel. All right, stepping on it here, full throttle, it's just not all that fast. It's fine though. I mean, it gets up to, just merged onto the highway, it gets up to highway speed, no problem. It's not an issue, but by modern standards, this would never fly. But it does what it needs to do. And you do have a good commanding driving position. Now, one thing I'm really surprised about, actually, it's smoother than I expected that it would be. Like, the ride quality is pretty smooth on the freeway. It doesn't feel like you have to make a lot of steering adjustments. It doesn't, you don't hear a lot of tire noise, a lot of wind noise. I'm surprised at how little I'm actually hearing while I'm driving this. The ride quality is definitely less smooth when you're on city streets, kind of going over bumps, that sort of thing. But on the freeway where the pavement is smoother, the ride is nice. It's like okay. From a driving perspective, there's not much to write home about with the Montero. And this was not a vehicle where driving enjoyment was a major focus. It wasn't a big thing that they were thinking about. They wanted to make a robust, sturdy, long-lasting vehicle, and they did. But it's not fun, it's not fast. No aspect of this is like, whoa, this is so exciting and cool. It's just built. It's just like it feels sturdy and strong, and I guess that's where the enjoyment kind of comes from. And the sitting up high, the feeling of having, like, you feel strong and it is strong. It's almost become cliche to say they don't make them like this anymore, but they really don't. You know, in the 90s, the Japanese were making SUVs that people wanted to use as utility vehicles, the Pathfinders and the Troopers, and that's obviously changed a lot. And so the Japanese have changed also. The CR-Vs and the RAV4s and the Nissan Rogues have become the popular ones. But this was where the market was back then, and they don't do this anymore. There is not demand for these big, bulky, you know, off-road type SUVs. It is kind of coming back, but from more of an enthusiast curiosity perspective, whereas back in the day, this was how you drove around. I mean, my family, we had a 1993 Isuzu Rodeo. That was our daily car for 10 years, and this is how it felt. And we put up with how trucky it was. That was just what you did if you wanted an SUV. This is certainly a throwback to an era where trucky was not only just a nice thing people kind of wanted in SUVs, but it was almost the only way you could get them. In 95, there weren't a lot of SUVs that were car-focused, comfortable, quiet, low to the ground, easier to drive. It just wasn't a thought in the radar. And this certainly takes you back to an era where you could drive like a truck with an enclosed cargo area, basically, and that was a family vehicle because it kind of had to be. And you felt like you could run over every curb around because it felt tough. A lot tougher than modern crossovers. And so that's the Mitsubishi Montero. No, it doesn't have the brand name of the Toyota Land Cruiser, but you also don't pay the Toyota Land Cruiser tax when you buy it. But you still get a sturdy, bulky SUV that can go almost anywhere. And you can get this one on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give this Montero the DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 41 out of 100, which places the Montero here against some other sort of similar SUVs. This Montero is cool. It looks neat, it feels rugged, and it's decently practical, so you can drive something fun and bring along the whole family. It's a fun SUV that's aging well into classic status, and it's also reasonably capable off the pavement.